Hello, everyone. It is fantastic to have you all back. Episode 2, Let's Get Down to Business. In 1947, the very year Otto Von Bismarck got married, he began his most epic political career. He was only 32 at the time. However, he gained quite the reputation for being an evangelical, ultra-conservative, landed aristocrat. These views actually gave Bismarck an easy in with influential Christian groups within the Prussian political spheres. Such groups imagined themselves as stout defenders of the aristocratic system, which could combat the encroachments of the liberal bureaucratic centralization. Otto von Bismarck had nothing but sarcasm for the aristocratic liberals, who viewed England as a model for the Prussian political system. In 1847, Bismarck attended the Prussian United Diet. During this diet, he gained quite a reputation for being a backwoods conservative completely out of touch with the political complexities of Russia. However, during the Prussian Revolution of 1848, his craziness became his shining light, especially in the eyes of the aristocratic hierarchy. The year of 1848 was one of great turmoil throughout Europe. The revolution in Prussia was only a handful on the continent. Many monarchs were desperate for support. And just like today, politicians who are very far right or very far left, aka crazy people, can gain extraordinary amounts of power during times of great political instability. Well, this revolution completely overwhelmed King Frederick William IV. He needed allies, and Bismarck was his loudest supporter. Frederick was initially indulged by the thought of using his military forces to suppress the revolution. However, cooler heads prevailed, and he chose not to retreat to the army base at Potsdam. Bismarck later recorded that the Prussian officers were rattling their sabers in their scabbards when the king refused to use military force to destroy the revolution. Frederick offered numerous liberal concessions to the revolutionaries. He started to wear the red, black, and gold colors of the revolution, which are the same colors of the German flags today. He promised the German people a constitution, a future merger of the German states, and appointed a liberal minister president. And although a constitution was granted, its provisions fell far short of the demands of the revolutionaries. Bismarck's reaction to the revolution that spread across Europe throughout 1848 confirmed his image as a counter-revolutionary. He admittedly opposed any concessions that the revolutionaries posed, and even showed strong contempt for King Frederick's willingness to bargain with the revolutionaries. He even contemplated marching on the capital to free the king from the influences of the revolution. To understand Bismarck's future role in the development of Germany, it is critical to understand his analysis of the revolution. Bismarck, along with such contemporaries as Karl Marx, identified the middle class as the epicenter of the forces of change. However, in Prussia, peasants and artisans made the majority of the Prussian population, who he saw as loyal monarchists. Even today, the split of left and right can be loosely divided as urban and rural. Bismarck knew that to earn the loyalty of these two groups, he needed to provide material concessions. He also believed that the urban middle-class radicals were based in pure self-interest and that they would hamper industrial growth at the expense of the rural farm population in the lower middle class. Bismarck concluded ultimately even the middle class might be persuaded by success in foreign policy and tactical concessions. The opportunistic strategy set Bismarck apart from other conservatives who couldn't get past their own ideological barriers. He had a vision to reward groups who became obedient to his cause. This ultimate pragmatic approach helped him greatly throughout his political career. This form of diplomacy ultimately became known as realpolitik and became greatly associated with Bismarck. This is one reason I became interested in Bismarck. Even though there are labels such as ultra-conservative in every article you read about him, he was able to offer tangible concessions to his opposition. He wouldn't let ideological stubbornness get in the way of order and progress. Bismarck was elected to the Prussian Chamber of Deputies in 1849, which was the lower chamber in the Prussian Diet. At this stage, he was not considered a German nationalist. He was quoted as saying, "We are Prussians, and Prussians shall we remain. We do not wish to see the kingdom of Prussia obliterated in a putrid brew of a cozy South German sentimentality." With this mentality, Bismarck accepted a role into the Erfurt Parliament, which was an assembly of German states which would discuss a possible union. However, he only did so to dismantle the proposals from the inside. And for my Parks and Rec fans out there, he totally Ron Swanson this meeting. With Bismarck's help, the Parliament failed to bring about German unification. The main reason for this was that there was a total lack of support between the two most powerful German states, Austria and Prussia. And in 1850, after a dispute over Hesse, which was a small German state, Prussia was forced to back down by the Russian and Austrians, which was a great humiliation for the prideful Prussians. In 1851, Bismarck was appointed the head of Prussian envoy to the Diet of the German Confederation in Frankfurt. To do so, Bismarck relinquished his elected seat in the Landtag, which was an elected assembly in the Kingdom of Prussia. However, he was appointed to the Prussian House of Lords a few years later. At this assembly of the German Confederation, he was engaged in a battle of wills with the Austrian representative, Count Friedrich von Thun. Bismarck used petty tactics and intimidation to be treated as an equal by his Austrian counterpart. With the defeat of the political revolutions throughout Europe, Austria had reasserted its supremacy throughout the German states, and Bismarck, being labeled arch-conservative, was thought to be supportive of the status quo. However, the 8 years he lived in Frankfurt, he experienced an environment and culture quite different than that of his Prussian estates. During his time in Frankfurt, Bismarck began to rethink his views on German nationalism and his development on Prussian foreign policy. He began to realize that if he kept on supporting the status quo, he would be accepting Prussia as a second-rate power in the European political sphere. Since there was now distance between Bismarck and his ultra-conservative Prussian friends, he began to become less reactionary and more pragmatic, and he started to oppose close cooperation with Austria. Over time, Bismarck became convinced that to counteract Austria's newly restored influence, Prussia and other German states would have to come together. As a consequence, he began to grow more accepting of a united German nation. Additionally, he and fellow conservatives had to take the lead in making Prussia the center of this new German state. This vision of Prussia being the head of a German state and the redirection of Austria being the head of a Slavic-dominated state took place in his mind. Bismarck didn't even exclude a war with Austria, if necessary, if it meant ending Austria's hegemony of the German people. However, such policies would not conserve the European status quo. It would bring along radical changes, which Bismarck fought against all his life. Bismarck also worked to maintain a friendly relationship with Russia and France. This was twofold, as a friendship could threaten Austria in the future, and it helped prevent France allying with Russia against Prussia. Bismarck was also putting his chess pieces into play before other people knew they were even playing. However, during the Crimean War of the mid-1850s, France, Britain, and Austria aligned themselves against Russia, and during the peace talks in Paris, Prussia was almost not invited. This alarmed Bismarck, as it could have been a sign of European isolationism, and with high diplomacy of the 1800s, this was not a good sign. If you would like to get in touch with me, please email me at historyofbismarck@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook at Bismarck Podcast, and I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/historyofbismarck. So please let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time.